dear students. I am Dr. Shikha Pandey, Associate Professor from Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. So today we're going to discuss about the biodiversity and biotic resources, their basic definition and terminology. Now starts this lecture with some conservation of biodiversity. As in the previous lecture, we have already discussed about the biodiversity. Biodiversity words mean biological diversity. Diversity and variation at the level of biological organism, whatever biological things is present on the earth is called as biodiversity. So first we'll get about definition is like define the term ex situ conservation of biodiversity. So conservation of biodiversity under the control of humans and outside the natural habitat through different techniques like zoo, captive breeding program, aquarium, botanical garden and gene banks is called as ex situ conservation of biodiversity. Means conservation of biodiversity, conservation of any species outside their own habitat, means in an artificial environment. In an artificial environment, and its example is zoo, captive breeding, aquarium, botanical garden and gene bank. This is called as ex situ conservation of biodiversity. Ex situ, as we have already discussed about the conservation of biodiversity, means conservation of biodiversity is very much important because we are totally dependent on the biological diversity for our survival. Means we'll get food, we'll get shelter, medicine, drugs, soil, everything whatever we are getting today's world is due to this biodiversity. That's why the conservation is very much important. So first one is about the in situ conservation. In situ conservation related with the point that conservation of biodiversity into their own habitat. And ex situ conservation related with the conservation of biodiversity into outside the habitat, like they will be ex situ conservation means conservation of biodiversity outside their habitat into any place or any area that will be not suitable, that will be make suitable by providing all basic facility, by providing all environmental condition for the survival of any particular species, so that species will survive better or will do better, and in this way their population will be increased. And if their population will be increased, again they will do the reintroduction of that species into their natural habitat. So this is ex situ conservation, and the example of ex situ conservation is the zoo, captive breeding program, aquarium, botanical garden and gene bank. In zoo, we'll keep some specific animal so that they will be protected, they will be safe, and will provide all their basic facility for the survival and growth of that species. Next is captive breeding program is there. Some program is there where they will do captive breeding of any particular species like crocodile. And in many national parks, what they are doing, they will providing crocodile captive breeding program. In this way, the crocodile numbers has been increased. Like aquarium is there to save some aquatic animals, and botanical garden is there to save any plants that is going to be endangered. And gene bank is there. In gene bank, will protect the gene of any particular species, so that we'll do research on these genes of the species, and then further reproduction will also do. Then next definition is related is that define the term gene bank. Gene bank is a very important term that has been asked in the examination. And what does this term means? Gene bank is the collection of seeds, plants or animals that has been maintained as a repository of genetic material, typically to preserve genetic diversity, is called a gene bank. Is a collection of seeds, plants or animals that has maintained as a repository of genetic material. That is basically their aim to store or to protect the genetic material, genetic makeup of any organism. That will be mainly done to preserve the genetic diversity. Next is the seed bank. Seed bank is again the collection and storage of seed to preserve the genetic diversity, and it is again, we can say that it is also a type of a gene bank. So this is about the seed bank. Seed bank is the collection and storage of seeds to preserve genetic diversity, and it is a type of gene bank also. Now next thing related with the ex situ conservation is the define the term cryo preservation. Cryopreservation is the method of keeping the live cell or tissue under some biological samples in a deep freezer at sub-zero temperature for the storage or preservation. This sample is commonly kept at minus 196 degrees Celsius. It's called as cryopreservation. It is a method of keeping any live cell, some live plant, some live tissue, and some biological sample into a deep freezer or sometimes like a sub-zero temperature. And it for the storage, this will be also for the storage or for preservation of any organism. And these are the different ex situ methods to preserve or to store or to preserve genetic makeup or a live organism for the future purpose or for the future use. And then the temperature is like minus 196 degree Celsius. In a very freezing temperature is there, a very sub-zero temperature is there, so that will be preserve any live cell, any tissue or any biological sample in a deep freezer. Next term is the what are botanical gardens. Means what are botanical garden? So botanical garden is a garden dedicated to the collection, cultivation, preservation and display of any species, especially some wide range of plant which are typically labeled with their botanical names. So what will happen in this botanical garden? Botanical garden is done to dedicate the collection of the species, its conservation and display of the especially wide range of plants which are typically labeled with their botanical name. Means that should be named by their botanical names so that we'll get information. Any layman can understand what the plant is there. That's why if a person will go to visit a botanical garden, they will automatically, they will generate interest, they will show interest towards the name of the plant, what is the basics of what is the benefits of that plant, how they are saving the plant. So that will be good for the awareness of people also, and the awareness of people toward the conservation of biodiversity. That's why botanical garden has been made, and it is basically dedicated to the collection of all the plants and then its preservation and its display, and will put labels also, so that any layman, any normal person will come to visit the botanical garden. They will get some interest, they will get some awareness towards the conservation of plants and animals. Next is like defined in the term national park. National park is a natural park in use for conservation purpose, created and protected by national government. National park is a natural park, means any area that is natural for the conservation purpose, and it is created and protected by the national government. Means all whole and sole authority of this national park is the national government. Next point is related with this subject is the define the tissue culture. Tissue culture is again the growth of tissue or cell in an artificial medium that separate from the parent organism. This technique is also called as micropropagation. Now let's start the next topic, that is define the term tissue culture. Tissue culture is the growth of tissues or cell in an artificial medium separate from the parent organism. This technique is also called as micropropagation. Means what we will do, this is again we can say that it is a method of ex situ conservation. Ex situ conservation. Ex situ conservation. What we'll do in this, it is a growth of tissues or cell in an artificial medium. In an artificial medium where growth of any plant should be done, to protect it, to keep that organism into a safe, and this is into a safe lab or where it is. This technique is also called as micropropagation. Next is like a defined zoological garden. So zoological garden are those places where wild animals are maintained in captivity and conservation of wild animals. And it's some wild animals like those who are rare or endangered. Example, we can say that any zoological garden, that is Alipur Zoological Garden in Kolkata. Zoological garden are those places where wild animals are maintained in captivity and conservation of wild animals. This is again a method of ex situ conservation. What captivity should be there so that they will maintain for any wild animal or those animals that are nearly rare or those they are endangered in nature, so that they will maintain and they will preserve the animals to a place where we will keep these animals to safe. And this is about the zoological garden. Zoological garden is many zoological garden in the whole world. In the India, the main purpose of making zoological garden is to save those animals that are coming under the category of rare or endangered. And in this zoological garden, they will provide everything for the survival and growth of a species, and they will keep safe the any species by hunting also, by anything also. But they will make them available for the research purpose or any educational purpose. That's why if we'll make it available for the any person to for educational purpose, then any person will understand its value and its need for conservation. That's why this ex-situ conservation is there, and the ex-situ conservation will also always provide for some educational purpose, and research is always allowed in ex-situ conservation of biodiversity. Next is term is the defined translocation of animal. Translocation of animal is also a method of ex-situ conservation. What will happen in this translocation of wildlife in conservation is the capture. First we do capture, transport and release or introduction of species, habitat or other ecological material from one location to another location. This is called as translocation of animal. Wildlife conservation it will be involved with the capturing, transport and release or introduction of a species, habitats and other ecological materials like such as soil from one location to another location is called as animal translocation. Animal translocation will involve the movement of any animal from one location to another location is called as animal translocation. Next is the sacred groups. Sacred groups are the groups of trees that have a special religious importance with a particular culture, that will be also called as in the category of conservation of biodiversity. What ancient people will do, they will connect any plant like tulsi plant, we can say, like mango, we can say, with their culture, and they start worshipping of the plant. So in this way they are protecting the plant, and that will be also we can say that it is a conservation of biodiversity. That's why sacred groups word is there. Sacred groups means those that are holy in nature, and these are the groups of trees that have a special religious importance with a particular culture, and in this way they are protecting our environment. In this way they are conserving our this biodiversity. This is a very great method by our ancient people to conserve the biodiversity. Ancient people will make many plants like mango tree, tulsi, amla, any plant, we can say that they have connected it with their rituals, and they are started worshipping the plant as a holy plant. In this way the plant is conserving also, they are protecting the plant also. Then next point is that what are the main reason for rich biodiversity in tropics. India is present on the tropics. That's why our country is having a very rich biodiversity, and with rich biodiversity, very high variation is also there. Rich biodiversity, and then high variation. As India is the present on the tropic of a country, tropic of the world. That's why it is rich biodiversity is there. So in at the tropic, they are the temperate region. Tropics, India is a temperate region due to warm temperature and high humidity and more stable climate. Climate is also more stable. At the tropics, the temperature condition is that they have a warm temperature, high humidity and more stable climate is called as. That's why this India is present in the tropic level, and that's why India is having a very high richness of biodiversity, because this is the main reason for high richness of biodiversity, because India is present in the tropics, and India, the temperature is a temperate region. This country is a temperate region, and temperate region is due to the warm temperature, high humidity and more stable climate is there. And all these things are very much suitable for the survival and growth of a species and any species. That's why they are having a more number of species. Their reproduction rate is very good due to the temperature. Environmental factors are very much suitable for the growth or survival of any species. Next is what are wildlife sanctuary. Wildlife sanctuary is again a protected area where killing, hunting, shooting or capturing of wildlife is prohibited except under control of highest authority. Means in any case, highest authority will provide hunting or killing, but for a normal person, killing, hunting, shooting is never allowed. This is wildlife sanctuary is a protected area. A area will be protected to save any wildlife of into their own habitat. This is the conservation of method, in situ conservation method. Wildlife sanctuary is the in situ conservation method, means protecting wildlife into their own habitat. Own habitat means all any wildlife like dolphin sanctuary is there. So dolphin is protected into their own wildlife where they are belongings, and it is that kind of protected area where nothing is allowed, like you can't killing, hunting, shooting or capturing of wildlife or hunting, nothing is allowed, and it is prohibited except sometimes it will be do under the control of the highest authority. Authority is there. If something is important, if something they want to do, they will do by the permission of higher authority, that will be the authority of that particular area. So this is about the wildlife sanctuary. Wildlife sanctuary is nothing but it is a protected area that will be allowing to protect any particular species into their own habitat, from their own house, from that place where they are belongings, is called as in situ conservation of biodiversity and wildlife sanctuaries also. India is having almost 500 of wildlife sanctuary. Elephant sanctuary is there, dolphin sanctuary is there, tiger sanctuary is there, many sanctuaries is there, bird sanctuary is there. So they will protect the birds for every whatever, means many organism belongs to that place. A government has made that area as a protected area for the safety of that particular species into their own habitat. That is called as wildlife sanctuary. Now comes to the next point, that is what is poaching of wildlife. It is also an important question that will be asked in the examination. What is the poaching of wildlife? Poaching of wildlife is the illegal shooting, trapping or taking a game, fish or plant for private property or from one place where such practices are specifically reserved or forbidden. Poaching is generally, we can understand by poaching is that illegal shooting, illegal killing of any animal is called as poaching of wildlife. And sometimes people will hunt the animal for meat purpose. Sometimes they will do illegal trading. Sometimes they will use it for the game. Animals are using in the circus for games and for entertainment of the people, and that is the illegal hunting. That is a very great, very high crime for any animals. That comes under the category of poaching of wildlife. Now all practices is banned because nothing is allowed. No animal can be go to the circus, or no animal will take for the shooting, or they cannot harm the animals. So this is poaching of wildlife. Poaching of wildlife is the illegal shooting, trapping or taking of games, fish or plant for private property or from a place where such practices are specifically reserved or forbidden. Next is the habitat destruction. Habitat destruction is the process by which a natural habitat becomes incapable of supporting its native species. Means destruction or cutting of tree in this manner that a natural habitat will become incapable of surviving or nourishing their own native species. That is called as habitat destruction. The organisms that previously inhabited the site are displaced or dead, thereby reducing biodiversity and species abundance. The organisms that are already residing in that place are now dead or displaced, and that is reducing the biodiversity, that will reducing the number of species also. It is the process. Habitat destruction is the cutting of tree or destructing the forest of any home of any area, habitat of any species. And what will happen to the natural habitat is now become incapable to nourish their own individual, to nourish its own native species, is called as habitat destruction. Habitat destruction will leads to the destruction of animal, and that will be causes the organism that previously inhabited the site are now dead, and thereby they are reducing biodiversity and species abundance also. Define the term mangrove. Mangrove is a very important term. It is a shrub or tree that grow in a coastal saline or brackish water. Example is the Sundarban group. Brackish water means saline water plus fresh water. Saline water plus fresh water. It is that place where a freshwater river, where a river meets with the ocean. River meet with the ocean. River plus ocean is called as brackish water is there. Means fresh water mixed with ocean water at that place is called as brackish water. And that place where the shrubs will be growing, that shrub is known as mangroves. And its example is the Sundarban groups of the West Bengal that is present in the West Bengal. This is a very, and in this ecosystem is a very fertile ecosystem, and where many rare organisms you can find, many rare fish, rare shrubs is there, and that water is called as brackish water. Brackish water means fresh water plus saline water, means where the river meet with ocean, that place will be formed because due to collection of water, one place the water will be collected and that will be created like a pond, that is called as brackish water. And its example is the Sundarban of West Bengal. Define the term wetlands. Wetlands definition. Wetland can be defined as an area where water covers the soil or is present either at or near the surface of the soil all year or for a varying period of time during the year, including during the growing season only. Means wetland is nothing but it is the water cover the soil. Water cover the soil means water table will come above the soil surface. Water table will come above the soil surface is called as wetland. Above the soil surface is called the wetland. Wetland are area where water covers the soil or is present either at or near the surface of the soil all year or for varying periods of time during the year. That will include the growing season only. Next is the intellectual property right. What is intellectual property right? Means intellectual property refers to the ownership of an idea or design by a person who came with it. Means IP, if we'll understand in the general word like IP, intellectual property. Intellectual property means the ownership of any property that belongs to a person, and it is used in the property law. It gives a person for certain rights to a distinct time to creative design, meaning that nobody else can copy or reuse that creation without the owner's permission. Is called as intellectual property right. Intellectual property right is related with the biodiversity also. What will happen if the Indian rice is there? So it is India is the only ownership of this rice. If they want to share it with other country, they want to sell it with other country, they want to give it to other country, that is the right of an Indians to preserve its intellectual property with it. And if they want to give it to other country, they will take a sharing, they will take a benefit by sharing their own resources. So this will be also a method of conservation of biodiversity. So in XE2, in what CBD is there, CBD, Convention on Biological Diversity, this is the CBD is there, Convention on Biological Diversity. So it is a convention that has been made for the conservation of biodiversity. So what they said that it is a right of a country to share or to take the benefit from their own native resources. It is a right of any country. If they want to sell it to other country, if they want to do research in collaboration with the other country, it is a right of the ownership of the country where that species has been belonged. Means from which place that species has been belonged. So if Indian rice is there, it is belong to India only. So it is whole authority of Indian people, Indian government to take the rights of sharing their knowledge or sharing the benefits from rice to other countries. So this is about the intellectual property right. It is the ownership of an idea or design by a person who came with it, and it is related with the permission of a ownership. Those who are the owner of that particular thing will have the permission. You have to take the permission first from the owner, so that they will utilize their natural resources into their country or not. In this way, biological diversity conservation we can achieve, because if it is available in the free amount, anybody can utilize or anybody can take, so any country will do R&D in any country's resources. So this will be not good for the biodiversity conservation. Means this will lead to the exploitation, or habitat destruction, or cutting of the trees, or this will lead to the not to the conservation of biodiversity. That's why that word is there, CBD. And CBD has made a provision for the right and for the equitable sharing of the benefits from with a country with their own nature and natural resources. Now comes to the next, some full form is there, NBA, National Biodiversity Authority. NBA means National Biodiversity Authority. It is an authority that will make rules and regulation for the conservation of nature and its natural resources. They will make authority for the protection of genetic resources from any plant, or for the protection of animal things, or a protection of any organism by sharing with the other organisms also. Now next is what R stands for, NBPGR, NBAGR. NBPGR is the word that is related to the National Bureau of Plant Genetic Resources, and NBAGR is the National Bureau of Animal Genetic Resources. Means it is a kind of gene bank where the plant genetic material has been restored. Plant genetic material is stored. Is that's why NBPGR is the kind of gene bank which will restore the genetic resources of plant. And next is the NBAGR. NBAGR is the National Bureau of Animal Genetic Resources. Means they are storing the genetic resources, so that some research will be done for the introduction of the species into the biodiversity habitat, or to introduction of the species, reintroduction of species into their habitat. That's why these seed banks are there. Gene bank, seed bank is there. Next is the IPR. What the stand for IPR? IPR is the intellectual property right. Intellectual property right means a right related with a person who is the owner of that particular property, is called as IPR. Next point is related with the term, what is man-wildlife conflict? Man-wildlife conflict is the conflict when encounter between human and wildlife that will lead to the negative result, like loss of property, livelihood, and even life of a man also. And the natural size of forests are reducing because of human encroachment. Therefore, animal often attacks on human society, or sometimes create a violence. Man-wildlife conflict is related to a conflict happen between encounter or encroachment happen between a human and wildlife, that will sometimes leads to the loss of property, livelihood, or even life. Man is encroaching, and it is expanding to their houses up to the forest areas also. Man is making their homes up to the forest areas also. So if they will enter into the habitat of any wild organism, wildlife, obviously that the wildlife will survive, will enter into the human territory. And when they will enter into the human territory, some fear is there, and due to the fear, that wildlife attacks the human being, and in this way there is a very much loss, and some negative result is there, like loss of property, livelihood, or sometimes even life of an animal will be over, or sometimes human death of human beings is also. It is happened due to the reduction in the forest size and reduction of the human encroachment due to the human activity, anthropogenic activity, due to development, urbanization. Human being is entering into the forest territory, and due to that, the attack of the human society, animal will attack on the human beings or sometimes the society. This is a man-wildlife conflict, and in this way, it is a very serious crime, and now it is a very great tension toward this man-wildlife conflict, and it is happening everywhere. You can see in the south areas also, elephants attack on the human beings. Sometimes human being will kill the elephants like that. And next definition is related is that the ecotourism. Ecotourism, we can define it as the responsible travel to natural area that conserve the environment, sustain the well-being of local people, and involve interpretation and education. So ecotourism means tourism that will eco-friendly, that will be eco-friendly. Eco-friendly means it can define it as the responsibility to travel to natural areas that will be going to conserve the environment and sustain the wholesomeness and well-being of local people, and involves the interpretation and education. Means that kind of tourism that will be responsible for the protection of natural area, conserve the forest, and sustain the well-being of forest and the people. And that will involve the interpretation, or if a person will get some idea, a person will get some knowledge, education from that tourism, that will called as ecotourism. Means that kind of tourism that is eco-friendly, or that will be a responsible to a natural area, will be going to conserve the environment and sustain its well-being, and then we'll take some benefits, we'll take some knowledge about the tourism, and then we'll get some knowledge about the local species and all the plants. That is called as ecotourism. Ecotourism is nothing but a tourism in an eco-friendly manner, is called as ecotourism. Now comes to the next topic, that is what are the advantages of biodiversity conservation. As we have already discussed many things regarding the conservation of biodiversity, this is about the why this conservation is important, and what does the advantage we'll get, and what is the benefit we'll get by conserving the biodiversity. So the many enormous value of biodiversity is there, because it is a genetic value, commercial value, medicinal value, aesthetic value, ecological and optional importance. Emphasize the need to conserve the biodiversity. Means they will provide some generic value, commercial also, medical, like will get many medicinal plants. Aesthetic value is also there, will enjoy the will enjoy the trees, will take the fresh air. Then ecological optional importance emphasizes the need to conservation of biodiversity. That's why this conservation of biodiversity is very much important, because any human being will get enormous value, will get many values, will get many benefits from their biodiversity. And the values related with either with genetic value, commercial values like aesthetic value, medicinal values, ecological and optional importance, that will emphasize the needs to conserve biodiversity. That's why it is important to conserve the biodiversity. Next is what are the reasons for the conservation of biodiversity. So the reason for the conservation of the biodiversity is it will reduce the soil depletion by monoculture, and then maintaining a genetic resources for medicinal uses. Means if we'll maintain the genetic resources, like if we'll maintain the genes in the gene bank or seed bank, then automatically we'll get genetic resources, will preserve our resources for the future generation. Then automatically we will go toward the sustainability of resources, sustainability of resources, and then the protection of landscape or species, that has been very much important for a human beings, and for a ecological life balance. A balance between animals and human beings is also very important. That's why the conservation of biodiversity is very important. Now this is all about the conservation of biodiversity, and this is all about, we have a study about the biodiversity, its type and the variation level among the species, and the variation and richness of species, and then the conservation of biodiversity by in situ method and ex situ method. In situ method will involve the conservation of biodiversity into their own habitat, and ex situ method will going to conserve the biodiversity into outside their habitat. And ex situ method, we have a study about the seed bank, gene bank, arboreta, aquarium, everything. And then convention of biological diversity is there. One convention has been made to preserve the nature and natural resources, and then IPR has been given to any country. IPR, we have discussed about the IPR, that is intellectual property right. Means it is a right of an individual for to sharing of the benefits or sharing of their plant genetic material or genetic resources. It is a total a right of a country, of it is a right of an ownership that we have already discussed. And then advantages of biodiversity conservation. Biodiversity conservation is very much important, as they are providing us many good benefits, as we are getting benefits from the conservation of biodiversity. Generic values is there, some commercial values, some medicinal value, aesthetic value, ecological and optional importance is there, that will emphasize, that will be make it important for the conservation of biodiversity. And the reasons for the conservation of biodiversity is also very much important, because it is going to reduce the soil depletion. Monoculture is there, like many crops has been culture of crop is there, that's why monoculture. And then genetic material is maintaining the genetic resources for its medicinal uses. And then we are protecting landscape species that are very important to admire. So this was all about the basic terminology and basic definition related with the topic biodiversity and biotic resources. Thank you for today's lecture.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.